The grand entrance of the hotel plaza loomed above me like the gates to a different world, one where debt collectors didn't pound on doors at 6 a.m, and the smell of stale yeast didn't cling to your hair like a second skin. I tightened my grip on the small beaded clutch I had borrowed from a vintage shop in the village, my knuckles turning white against the dark fabric. Tonight, I wasn't Clara Mitchell, the struggling owner of a bakery that was 3 days away from foreclosure. Tonight, I was a commodity, a carefully packaged product signed up for elite dates, trading a few hours of conversation for a check that would keep the ovens on for another month. I smoothed the fabric of my silver gown. Not green, never green, and certainly not the navy blue that every other woman seemed to wear to these functions. It was a sharp, metallic silver that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I needed armor. The email from the bank was burned into my retinas. Notice of default. Immediate action required. My father had died leaving me flour, sugar, and a mountain of hidden loans. I would sell my soul before I let them put a padlock on Mitchell's patisserie. Name? The doorman asked, his voice devoid of interest. Clara, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. I'm here for Lorenzo. Someone. The agency hadn't given me a last name, just a pseudonym and a description. The doorman checked a list, nodded once, and pulled open the heavy brass doors. The noise hit me first, a wave of laughter, clinking crystal, and a string quartet playing something aggressive and classical. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I stepped inside, the heel of my shoe sinking slightly into the plush crimson carpet. I scanned the room, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The instructions were specific. Meet him by the central ice sculpture. He will be wearing a white boutonniere. I navigated through the crowd, feeling like an imposter. These people moved with a languid grace that screamed of generational wealth. I moved like I was late for a shift. I forced myself to slow down, to breathe. I spotted the sculpture, a ridiculous melting swan, and saw him. Lorenzo was undeniably handsome in a way that felt almost aggressive. He had jet black hair slicked back perfectly, skin that looked like it had never seen a day of hard labor, and a jawline that could cut glass. He was leaning against a pillar, checking his reflection in the screen of his phone. As I approached, he looked up. His eyes, dark and restless, swept over me. He didn't look at my face first. He looked at my body, a slow, assessing crawl that made my skin prickle with discomfort. "You must be the bakery girl," he said. His voice was smooth, but there was a jagged edge to it, like a cracked veneer. "Clara," I corrected, extending a hand. "And you must be Lorenzo." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't invite anyone else in. He took my hand, but his grip was clammy, his palm slightly moist. "Lorenzo. Right. That's what they're calling me tonight." He didn't let go of my hand immediately. His thumb rubbed against my knuckles in a way that felt too familiar, too fast. "You clean up nice for someone who plays with dough all day. The agency photos were conservative. This is better." I pulled my hand back, wiping it discreetly against my dress. "Thank you. You have a lovely event here. It's a charity thing. Orphans or whales or something. I don't pay attention to the pamphlet." He winked, leaning in closer than necessary, invading my personal space with a cloud of heavy, musk-based cologne. "I'm just here to make an appearance and spend some money. Speaking of which, you want a drink? You look stiff. Relax, sweetheart. I'm paying for your time, might as well enjoy it. A water would be fine," I said, trying to keep the grimace off my face. "Water? Boring. I'll get us champagne. Stay here. Don't wander off. I want to parade you around in a bit. Make the old men jealous." He patted my arm, a condescending tap, and turned away, vanishing into the throng of people heading toward the bar. I let out a breath I had been holding for 5 minutes. 2 hours, I told myself. Just survive 2 hours of his arrogant commentary and clammy hands, get the check, and save the bakery. It was a transaction, nothing more. I leaned back against the pillar, closing my eyes for a second to center myself. The music shifted, the quartet stopped, and a full orchestra began to play a waltz. The atmosphere in the room changed, becoming heavier, more charged. "May I?" The voice came from behind me. It was deep, resonant, a baritone that vibrated through the floorboards and straight up my spine. I turned around, expecting to see Lorenzo back with the drinks. It was him, but it wasn't. The man standing before me had the same face, the same black hair, the same sharp jawline, the same height, but everything else was wrong. Or perhaps everything else was terrifyingly right. Where Lorenzo had slouched with arrogant laziness, this man stood with the stillness of a predator waiting in the tall grass. His tuxedo fit him differently, perfectly tailored across broad shoulders that seemed to strain against the fabric. He wasn't wearing a white boutonniere. He wasn't wearing anything unnecessary. But it was the eyes. Lorenzo's eyes had been restless, darting around the room, full of nervous energy. This man's eyes were dark, endless abysses of brown that locked onto mine with a focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. There was no moisture on his brow, no nervous tick in his jaw. He was absolute calm, absolute authority. I blinked, confused. Had he changed his jacket? Had he sobered up in the span of 3 minutes? "You're back fast," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "And you forgot the champagne." He didn't answer. He didn't smile. He didn't make a joke about whales or orphans. He simply extended a hand toward me. His palm was open, dry, and steady as a rock. "Dance," he commanded. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an invitation. It was an order delivered in a tone that suggested disobedience wasn't even a concept he recognized. I hesitated. My instincts, usually dormant, were suddenly screaming at me. This man felt dangerous in a way Lorenzo hadn't. Lorenzo was a sleazy rich boy. This man felt like he owned the building, the air, and potentially my next breath. But the contract? I was here to be a companion. If I caused a scene or refused him, I forfeited the money. I couldn't lose the bakery. I placed my hand in his. The moment our skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm, so violent I almost pulled back. His hand engulfed mine. It was hot, rough and calloused. The hand of a man who worked, who fought, not the soft, manicured hand I had touched earlier. His grip was firm, possessive, locking my fingers against his. He didn't wait for me to get my footing. He pulled me toward the dance floor. He didn't navigate the crowd. He parted it. People stepped out of his way instinctively, casting glances at him that looked a lot like fear. He didn't acknowledge anyone. His focus was entirely, suffocatingly, on me. When we reached the center of the floor, he spun me around. His arm snaked around my waist, pulling me flush against his body. I gasped. It was improper, far too close for a first dance, far too intimate for strangers. I could feel the hardness of his chest against my breasts, the solid muscle of his thigh brushing mine. He smelled different. The musk cologne was gone, replaced by the scent of rain, expensive scotch, and something sharp like gun oil. "Lorenzo?" I whispered, looking up at him. "You're different." He didn't speak. He began to move, and God, he could move. Lorenzo had walked with a swagger. This man danced with lethal precision. He guided me through the complex steps of the waltz, as if he were controlling my body with his mind. I didn't have to think. I just reacted to the subtle pressure of his fingers on my spine, the shift of his weight. We spun, the room blurring into streaks of gold and crimson around us. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. He was staring at me, studying every inch of my face. He looked at my mouth, then my eyes. Then the pulse I knew was fluttering wildly in my throat. It wasn't the lecherous look Lorenzo had given me. This was clinical, intense. Like he was memorizing a map. "Why aren't you talking?" I asked, feeling breathless. "You couldn't stop talking about yourself 5 minutes ago." His eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his stoic mask. "Talking is for men who have nothing to say." His voice was deeper, rougher. It scraped against my nerves in the most delicious, terrifying way. "Who are you?" I whispered, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "You're not him. You can't be." He spun me out, the silver fabric of my dress flaring around my legs, and pulled me back in with a snap that brought our faces inches apart. "I am the man holding you," he said low. That is all you need to know. You're hurting me. I lied. He wasn't hurting me. He was holding me together. I felt safer in his arms than I had felt in years, and that terrified me more than the danger radiating off him. I would never hurt you, he said. The conviction in his voice stunned me. It sounded like a vow, but I will not let you go. We continued to dance. A dark island in the middle of the ballroom. I felt the eyes of the room on us, heavy with judgment and curiosity. But he created a force field that kept the world at bay. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worrying about the bills, the oven repairs, the lonely nights. I was just existing, burning in the heat of this stranger's gaze. Then, over his shoulder, I saw movement. I froze. My feet faltered, missing a step. The man holding me corrected my balance instantly, holding me up effortlessly. I stared past him. There, standing near the entrance to the bar, holding 2 glasses of champagne, was Lorenzo. He was pale, ghostly pale. He was staring at us, at me and the man holding me, with an expression of sheer horror. The glasses in his hands were shaking so hard liquid was sloshing over the rims. He took a step back, as if he wanted to run but was glued to the floor by fear. I looked back at the man in my arms. The man with the exact same face. Twins. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The agency hadn't mentioned twins. No one had mentioned twins. You... I stammered, my eyes wide. There are 2 of you. The man didn't look around. He didn't check to see who I was looking at. He knew. Of course he knew. There is only one of me, he growled, the sound vibrating in his chest against mine. The other is a shadow. The music seemed to swell, reaching a crescendo that matched the panic rising in my throat. I tried to pull away, to step back, but his arm was a band of steel. He wasn't letting me go. Let me go, I said, panic finally bleeding into my voice. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I want out. I need to leave. He stopped dancing. We stood dead center of the ballroom, the other couples swirling around us like water around a rock. He released my hand but kept his arm around my waist, pulling me even closer until I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eye. He lowered his head, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear. I shivered violently. You entered a game you do not understand, Clara, he whispered. His use of my name, my real name, sent a shockwave through me. You came here for money. You came here to save a bakery. How do you know that? I gasped. I know everything, he said. He pulled back slightly to look me in the eyes. His gaze was hard, unforgiving, yet strangely possessive. But you made a mistake tonight. A critical error. He tilted his head toward the man by the bar, toward Lorenzo, who looked like he was about to faint. You let him touch you, the stranger said, and his voice dropped an octave, filled with a dark, simmering rage. You let him speak to you. You let him think he could have you. I thought he was my date, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I didn't know. Ignorance is not a shield, he said coldly. Then his expression shifted. The hardness remained, but something else flickered in the depths of those dark eyes. Something that looked like ownership. You picked the wrong brother, Bella. Beautiful. The Italian endearment rolled off his tongue like a caress, and a threat intertwined. But now, he continued, his thumb digging into my hip. The mistake is corrected. He didn't wait for me to argue. He didn't ask. He turned us both around, keeping me tucked firmly against his side, his body shielding me from the rest of the room. He began to walk toward the exit. Wait. I tried to dig my heels in, but he was unstoppable. He moved with a momentum that carried me along with him. My purse! I left my purse at the table. I have it, he said, not breaking stride. We cut through the crowd. I glanced toward the bar as we passed. Lorenzo, Matteo, whoever he was, saw us coming. He didn't step forward to claim his date. He didn't shout. He shrank back against the wall, eyes wide with terror, avoiding his brother's gaze entirely. It was pathetic. It was revealing. The man who had been so arrogant 5 minutes ago was now nothing more than a frightened child in the presence of this dark force. The stranger didn't even look at his twin. He walked past him as if he were furniture. a complete and total dismissal that spoke volumes about the power dynamic between them. We burst through the heavy brass doors and out into the cool night air of New York City. The noise of the street was a stark contrast to the stifled atmosphere of the ballroom. The doorman scrambled to open the door of a massive black armored SUV that was idling at the curb, its engine purring like a beast waiting to be unleashed. "Get in," the stranger ordered. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind biting through the thin fabric of my silver dress. My mind was racing. Every survival instinct I had was telling me to run, to scream, to call the police. This was kidnapping. This was insane. But then I looked back at the hotel doors. I saw Lorenzo watching us through the glass, his face twisted in a mixture of relief and malice. I remembered his clammy hands. I remembered the way he had looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Then I looked at the man holding the car door open. He stood tall, imposing, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that promised protection. Even if it came wrapped in danger, he hadn't lied to me. He hadn't made cheap jokes. He had just taken over. "Clara," he said. It was a command, but it was also an anchor. I looked at the dark interior of the car. I thought about the bakery. I thought about the foreclosure notice. I thought about how tired I was of fighting the world alone. I took a breath, stepped forward, and slid into the leather seat. He followed me instantly, the heavy door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. The lock engaged with a loud click. The world outside, the debt, the bakery, the wrong brother, was gone. I was locked in with the right one, and as the engine revved, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I had just walked willingly into the lion's den. The heavy thud of the armored door sealing shut severed the last connection to the world I knew. Inside the SUV, the air was still and scented with polished leather and the faint, sharp aroma of the man sitting next to me. The silence wasn't empty. It was pressurized, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I sat rigid against the seat, my hands clutching the beaded purse in my lap as if it were a lifeline. Outside the tinted windows, the city of New York blurred into streaks of neon and shadow, a moving abstract painting that I couldn't focus on. "Drive," the man ordered. His voice was low, devoid of the frantic energy that his brother had displayed, but it carried a weight that made the driver nod instantly. The car surged forward, merging aggressively into the late-night traffic. I turned my head slowly to look at him. Alessandro Verciani. The name felt heavy on my tongue, even though I hadn't spoken it aloud yet. In the confines of the car, he seemed even larger than he had in the ballroom. His legs were spread slightly, claiming the space, his hands resting loosely on his thighs, hands that could shatter bone or lead a waltz with terrifying precision. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his profile cut from granite, watching the road with a predator's focus. "You're not taking me home," I said. It wasn't a question. We were heading north, away from my cramped apartment in Queens. "No," he replied, his tone final. "Your home is compromised." "Compromised?" I echoed, a spark of indignation flaring in my chest. "I live in a fourth-floor walk-up with a lock that barely works. It's hardly a fortress to begin with. What does compromised mean?" He finally turned to me. The streetlights passing overhead cast rhythmic shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angle of his cheekbone and the depths of his dark eyes. There was no pity in his gaze. There was only a cold, clinical assessment of facts. "It means my brother does not lose gracefully," Alessandro said. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket. The movement was smooth, not threatening, but my muscles coiled instinctively. He pulled out a sleek black tablet and tapped the screen once before extending it toward me. "You asked who I was. You asked why I intervened." "Red." I hesitated, looking from his face to the device. "What is this?" "The reason you are sitting here instead of in a hotel suite being laughed at," he said brutally. I took the tablet. My fingers left smudges on the pristine glass. It was open to a messaging app, a private group chat. The timestamp on the messages was from earlier that evening, less than 2 hours ago. My stomach churned as I began to read. User, Maddie V, 8:45 p.m. Target acquired, the redhead from the agency. Elite Dates finally sent something edible. User, Luca Boy, 8:46 p.m. The baker? Didn't think she was your type. Too much flour, not enough silicone. User, Maddie V, 8:48 p.m. She's desperate. I checked her financials. She's drowning in debt. Daddy died and left her a sinking ship. She'll do anything for a payout. I felt the blood drain from my face. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had checked my financials. He knew about my father. I forced myself to keep reading, even as bile rose in my throat. User, Luca Boy, 8:50 p.m. 50K says you can't get her to the Plaza Suite before midnight. She looks stiff. Catholic school vibes. User, Maddie V, 8:51 p.m. Watch me. I'll play the charming investor. I'll promise to save her little shop. By 11 Sadir, she'll be on her knees, and I'll have the 50K. Easy money. I stared at the last message. Easy money. I wasn't a person to them. I wasn't a woman struggling to keep a family legacy alive. I was a prop, a bet, a way for rich, bored men to pass the time and exchange money they didn't need. The interaction in the ballroom replayed in my mind. Lorenzo's clammy hands, his invasive questions, the way he had looked at me like he was calculating my depreciation value. He hadn't been nervous because he liked me. He had been nervous because he was on a timer. A sound escaped my throat, a harsh, jagged intake of breath. I didn't cry. I refused to cry. Tears were for people who had the luxury of being soft. And I hadn't been soft since the day the bank sent the first foreclosure notice. Instead of tears, a cold, hard rage settled in my stomach. He bet on me, I said, my voice eerily calm. $50,000. Pocket change to him, Alessandro said. He took the tablet back from my unresisting fingers and slid it away. He didn't want you, Clara. He wanted the victory. He wanted to prove he could break something innocent just because he was bored. And you? I looked at him, searching his face for the same cruelty. What do you want? Did you bet against him? Did I just help you win a different pot? Alessandro's jaw tightened. For a moment, the air in the car grew heavy with ozone, the scent of a coming storm. I do not gamble with people's lives. I end the games my brother starts. Why? I demanded. Why me? Why tonight? You could have let him win. You could have walked away. I could have, he admitted. He shifted, turning his body fully toward me. The leather seat creaked under his weight. But then I saw you. I saw you standing there in that silver dress, looking like you were ready to go to war with the world, but terrified you didn't have the ammunition. You didn't belong in his game. You were misplaced. Misplaced, I scoffed, though the word hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. So you rescued the stray dog. I claimed what was being mishandled. He corrected, his voice dropping an octave. The word claimed sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Matteo breaks toys. I keep them. I am not a toy, I snapped. No, he agreed. You are not. Which is why I took you out of there before he could turn you into one. The car began to slow down. I looked out the window, expecting to see a hotel or a mansion, but the neighborhood was familiar. Too familiar. The knot in my stomach tightened until it was painful. We weren't in Manhattan anymore. We were in Brooklyn. We were 3 streets away from the bakery. Why are we here? I asked, leaning forward. You said my home was compromised. The bakery. I'm Matteo as a child, Alessandro said, his voice devoid of emotion, stating facts like a news anchor reporting a tragedy. When a child has his toy taken away, he throws a tantrum. When Matteo loses a bet, he flips the table. What did he do? My voice rose, panic finally cracking through the anger. Alessandro, what did he do? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The car turned the final corner onto 4th Avenue, and the answer was written in the sky. Orange light flickered against the dark clouds, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Smoke, thick and black, billowed into the air, choking the streetlights. No, I whispered. No, no, no. The car stopped. Before the driver could even put it in park, I was scrambling for the door handle. It was locked. Open it! I screamed, pounding on the glass. Open the door! Clara! Alessandro's voice was calm, a stark contrast to my hysteria. Wait! Open it! The lock clicked. I shoved the door open and stumbled out onto the pavement. The heat hit me instantly. It wasn't a warm summer breeze. It was a physical wall of scorching air. Mitchell's patisserie. The place where I had taken my first steps, where I had learned to braid dough before I learned to braid my hair, where my father's apron still hung on the hook in the back office, was gone. The front windows had been shattered. Flames were licking up the brick facade, consuming the awning that we had just replaced last year. The closed sign was melting, dripping like wax onto the sidewalk. Firefighters were there, shouting orders, their hoses blasting streams of water that looked pathetic against the roaring inferno. I stood frozen, the heat searing my face, my silver dress reflecting the destruction of my life. It wasn't just a building. It was my father. It was the smell of his cologne mixed with cinnamon. It was the sound of his laugh. It was the only thing I had left of him. The book, I gasped. The realization hit me like a bullet. The recipe book. It wasn't digital. It was a leather-bound journal, handwritten by my great-grandmother, added to by my grandfather, and finished by my dad. It was sitting on the metal prep table in the kitchen. I have to get it, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I took a step toward the police line, then another. I broke into a run. Hey, lady, get back, a fireman shouted. I didn't hear him. I just saw the flames eating the kitchen. I needed to save it. If I lost the book, I lost them. I lost everything. Arms wrapped around my waist. Hard, unyielding bars of iron. I was jerked back with such force that my feet left the ground. Let me go, I screamed, thrashing against the hold. I clawed at the suit jacket, digging my nails in, fighting like a wild animal. My dad's book. It's in there. Let me go. It's gone, Clara. Alessandro's voice roared in my ear, louder than the fire, louder than the sirens. Look at it. It's gone. No. I can save it. Let me go. I kicked backward, my heel connecting with his shin, but he didn't even flinch. He hauled me further back, away from the heat, away from the glass that was exploding outward. You go in there. You die, he growled, spinning me around and pinning me against his chest. He trapped my arms between us, forcing me to look at him instead of the fire. Is that what you want? To die for paper? It's not paper, I sobbed, the fight draining out of me as the reality crashed down. It's him. It's all I have left of him. If that burns, he's really dead. I collapsed against him, my legs giving out. He caught me, holding me upright, absorbing the weight of my grief. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't say, it's okay. He just held me while I watched my legacy turn to ash. The roof of the bakery collapsed with a sickening crash, sending a plume of sparks into the night sky. The crowd gasped. I buried my face in Alessandro's chest, unable to watch anymore. The smell of smoke was everywhere, soaking into my hair, into my dress. He did this. I whispered into the fabric of his lapel. Matteo. Yes, Alessandro said. His heart was beating steady and slow against my cheek, a terrifying contrast to the chaos around us. He sent his men 10 minutes after we left the hotel. He knew he couldn't have you, so he took away the place you were trying to save. I pulled back to look at him. My face was wet with tears, my makeup ruined, my hair a mess. I must have looked like a wreck. But Alessandro looked at me with that same intense focus he had in the ballroom. He thinks this breaks you, Alessandro said. He reached up, his thumb wiping a smudge of soot from my cheek. He thinks that without this building, you are nothing, just a desperate girl with debt. I am, I whispered. I have nothing now. The insurance won't cover arson if they think I did it for the money, and the debt remains. You have nothing, Alessandro repeated. Which means you have nothing to lose. He framed my face with his hands, forcing me to look at him. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, making them look like pools of molten lava. Come with me, he said. To where? I asked weakly. To be your mistress? To be another bet? To be my retribution, he said fiercely. I will rebuild this, Clara, brick by brick. I will make it better than it was. I will clear your debt. I will handle the insurance. I will handle Matteo. And what do I have to do? I asked. Nothing in this world was free. I knew that better than anyone. What is the price, Alessandro? You live in my house, he said. You cook in my kitchen. You stay where I can see you, where I can ensure my brother doesn't finish what he started. I looked over his shoulder at the smoldering ruins of the bakery. The sign was gone. The windows were black holes. There was nothing there for me anymore. No home, no job, no safety. Matteo Verciani had stripped me bare in a single hour because his ego had been bruised. I looked back at Alessandro. He was dangerous. He was a criminal. He was the brother of the monster who did this. But he was also the only person standing between me and the abyss. He had offered me a hand when I was drowning. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, smearing the soot, but clearing my vision. The sadness in my chest began to harden into something else. Something cold and sharp. Survival. You promise? I asked, my voice steadying. You promise you'll help me rebuild? I swear on my name, Alessandro vowed. On my blood. I will give you back your legacy. Then take me away from here, I said. I don't want to smell the smoke anymore. Alessandro nodded once. He didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a salvage operation. He shifted his arm to my shoulders, turning me away from the fire, shielding me from the cameras that were starting to flash as the press arrived. Eyes down, he murmured. Don't let them see you cry. You are with me now. We do not cry for the enemy to see. I straightened my spine. I took a deep breath of the tainted air and let it out. I walked beside him back to the car. The driver held the door open. This time I didn't hesitate. I slid inside, the leather seat cool against my feverish skin. Alessandro got in beside me. The door closed, shutting out the sirens, the fire, and the ruin of my past life. To the mansion, Alessandro ordered. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I couldn't. I looked at my hands, stained with soot, resting on the expensive silver fabric of my dress. I had lost the bakery. I had lost the book. But as I glanced at the man sitting silently beside me, his knuckles white as he gripped his knee, I realized I had gained something far more volatile. I had gained a weapon, and I was going to use him to make sure Matteo Verciani regretted the day he ever learned my name. Are you hungry? Alessandro asked quietly, breaking the silence after a few blocks. The question was so mundane, so domestic, that it almost made me laugh hysterically. No, I said. I'm not hungry. You will eat, he stated. Shock burns calories, and you will need your strength. For what? He looked at me, and the darkness in his eyes promised violence and salvation in equal measure. For the war we are about to start, he said. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. The image of the fire was burned into my eyelids, but the sound of his voice was louder. I was homeless. I was destitute. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. I had picked the wrong brother for a date, but I had accidentally chosen the right one for a war. And as the city lights faded into the trees of the suburbs, heading toward the Verciani estate, I knew that whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one burning. The car sped on, carrying us into the darkness, binding our fates together with the ashes of my past. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of him, clean, sharp, and dangerous, and let the exhaustion finally take me. I was safe. For tonight, that had to be enough. The silence of the Verciani mansion was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the eardrums unlike anything I had ever experienced in Brooklyn. In my old apartment, silence was a myth. There was always the hum of the refrigerator, the arguments of the couple next door, the distant siren of a police cruiser. Here, in the sprawling estate nestled in the hills of New Jersey, the silence was absolute. It was the quiet of a museum or a mausoleum. It had been 7 days since the fire. 7 days since I stood on the pavement and watched my father's legacy turn into ash and twisted metal. 7 days since I entered the beast's lair, not as a prisoner, but as a guest with no other options. I stood in the center of the kitchen, a space larger than my entire apartment, and ran my hand over the cold, pristine marble of the island. It was a chef's dream, equipped with a 6-burner Viking range, a walk-in refrigerator, and copper pots that looked like they had never been touched by a flame. That was the problem. This house, much like its master, felt untouched. It was sterile, perfect, and completely devoid of life. Alessandro had given me the East Wing. Your quarters, he had called it, as if we were in a Victorian novel. It had a bedroom with a balcony, a bathroom with a soaking tub deep enough to drown in, and a sitting room I hadn't used. He had provided me with a wardrobe of clothes that fit perfectly, all in muted tones of burgundy, gold, and cream, replacing the soot-stained silver dress I had arrived in. He had been polite, distant, and terrifyingly efficient. But I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a freeloader. And I certainly wasn't going to sit around in silk pajamas waiting for Matteo to finish me off. I checked the time on the industrial clock on the wall. 6 p.m. Alessandro would be home soon. In the week I had been here, I had observed his routine. He left before the sun came up. He returned after the sun went down. He drank black coffee. He rarely ate. The staff, a terrified housekeeper named Maria, and a rotation of stoic security guards, tiptoed around him like he was a sleeping tiger. I tightened the strings of the apron I had found in a drawer. It was stiff, brand new. I rolled up the sleeves of the cashmere sweater he had bought me. Ms. Mitchell? I turned to see Maria standing in the doorway, wringing her hands. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and pity. You don't have to cook, miss, she said, her voice a nervous whisper. We have a chef who comes in on weekends to prep meals, or we can order from the city. Mr. Verciani? He doesn't usually sit for dinner. He needs to eat, Maria, I said, pulling a knife from the magnetic strip. It was perfectly balanced, a Japanese steel blade that sang as I tested the edge against my thumb. And I need to work. If I don't do something with my hands, I'm going to lose my mind. But he didn't ask for... I know, I interrupted gently. But this isn't for him. It's for me. Now, where do you keep the shallots? By the time the front door opened an hour later, the kitchen smelled like home. It didn't smell like lemon pledge and emptiness anymore. It smelled of searing beef, reducing wine, and time. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. They were heavy, rhythmic, the sound of expensive leather on hardwood. He stopped in the doorway. I didn't turn around immediately. I was stirring the risotto, watching the arborio rice release its starch, turning creamy and golden with the saffron I had found in the back of the pantry. Something is burning, he said. His voice was rough, tired. Nothing is burning, I corrected, lowering the heat. That is the smell of caramelization. There is a difference. I turned then. Alessandro was standing there, still in his suit, though he had shed the jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie loosened. He looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the night of the ball. He looked at me, then at the pot on the stove, then back at me. His expression was unreadable. A mask of stone. You are cooking, he stated. I am, I said. I wiped my hands on a towel and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. We need to talk, Alessandro. About the arrangement. He stiffened slightly. Is the room not to your liking? Do you require something? The room is bigger than my entire childhood home, I said, and the clothes are beautiful. But I'm not a pet. I'm not a charity case. I don't sit around and look pretty while you pay my bills. He walked further into the room, the tension radiating off him in waves. You are not a charity case, Clara. You are a target. Keeping you here is a security measure. It's a cage, I countered. A gilded one. But a cage. And I don't do cages well. My father taught me that you work for what you get. I can't rebuild the bakery if I'm hiding in your East Wing watching Netflix. He stopped in front of the island, placing his hands on the marble. His knuckles were bruised again. Fresh bruises. I wondered whose face had gotten in his way today. What do you propose? He asked, his dark eyes locking onto mine. A trade, I said firmly. I live here. I eat your food. You are handling the insurance and the contractors for the bakery. That costs money. I don't have money, but I have skills. He raised an eyebrow. You want to pay me in pastries? I want to handle your kitchen, I said. Maria is terrified of you. The weekend chef preps bland chicken and leaves. You don't eat. You run on caffeine and adrenaline, and sooner or later, you're going to crash. If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to work. I will run the kitchen. I will cook your meals. I will manage the household supplies. It's a job. You pay off my bakery debt. I keep you fed and alive. We call it even. Alessandro stared at me for a long moment. The silence stretched, filled only by the bubbling of the risotto. I held his gaze, refusing to blink. I needed him to see me not as the victim he rescued from the ballroom, but as a partner, a professional. You want to be my staff, he said slowly. I want to be useful, I corrected, and I want to pay my way. He let out a short breath, almost a sigh. Matteo breaks things, he murmured, more to himself than to me. You try to fix things. Is that a yes? He looked at the stove. What is that smell? Risotto alla Milanese and ossobuco, braised for 3 hours. He looked back at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw hunger there. Not just physical hunger, but a deep, starving need for something warm. Fine, he said. It is a deal, but you do not serve me. We eat together. I do not like eating alone. Deal, I said. That night, for the first time in a week, Alessandro ate a full meal. We sat at the small table in the kitchen, not the long, formal dining table that could seat 20. We ate in relative silence, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of the mansion. It was the companionable silence of two people who were tired of fighting the world. I watched him eat, noting the way his shoulders relaxed after the first few bites, the way the tension lines around his mouth smoothed out. It is good, he said simply, after clearing his plate. It's better than good, I replied, taking a sip of wine. It's my recipe. He looked at me, his eyes dark and intense. You are stubborn, Clara Mitchell. I know, I smiled. It's how I survive. Yes, he said softly. I believe it is. The days fell into a routine, a strange domestic routine set against the backdrop of a Mafia war. Alessandro would leave early, usually before I was up, but I would leave a travel mug of coffee and a warm pastry on the counter for him. When I came down, the mug was always gone. I spent my days on the phone with insurance adjusters and contractors, calls that Alessandro had set up. He kept his word. The debris of Mitchell's patisserie was cleared within 3 days. The foundation work was scheduled. He wasn't just throwing money at the problem. He was using his influence to cut through the red tape that would have stalled me for months. But the threat of Matteo hung over us like a storm cloud. Security was tight. Men with earpieces patrolled the perimeter. I wasn't allowed to leave the grounds without an escort, which meant I spent my energy revolutionizing the Versiani kitchen. It was on a Tuesday morning that the boundaries shifted. I was in the foyer, checking a delivery of fresh produce, when Alessandro came down the grand staircase. He was surrounded by 3 men, his lieutenants, I assumed. They were talking in rapid-fire Italian, their voices low and urgent. Alessandro looked lethal. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit, his coat draped over his arm. He looked like a weapon sheathed in silk. He stopped when he saw me. The lieutenant stopped too, looking from him to me with guarded expressions. Clara, he acknowledged, a curt nod. Alessandro, I replied. There are fresh scones in the kitchen if you have time. No time, he said, checking his watch. I have a meeting with the commission. The situation with the docks is escalating. He meant Matteo. I knew enough now to read between the lines. Matteo was squeezing the supply lines, trying to hurt Alessandro's business to leverage a negotiation for his return to the family fold. Alessandro stepped forward, reaching for the door handle, but I stepped into his path. The guards tensed, hands twitching toward their jackets. Alessandro held up a hand to stop them. What is it? He asked, looking down at me. Your tie, I said. He frowned, looking down. The silk tie was crooked, the knot hasty and slightly off-center. It was a small imperfection, but on a man like him, who commanded absolute respect, it was a chink in the armor. It showed he was distracted. It showed he was stressed. It's fine, he said dismissively. It's not, I said. You're going to meet the commission. You have to look like you're in control of everything, including your wardrobe. I reached out. He froze. I saw his throat bob as he swallowed. My hands hovered for a second, giving him a chance to push me away, to tell me to know my place. He didn't move. I stepped closer, invading his personal space. I could smell him. The sharp scent of his soap, the bitterness of espresso, and the underlying warmth of his skin. I reached up and undid the knot. His breathing hitched, a small, barely audible sound. I smoothed the silk, my knuckles brushing against the sensitive skin of his neck. His pulse was hammering against my fingers, fast and hard. "You're nervous?" I whispered, keeping my eyes on the knot as I retied it. "I do not get nervous," he rumbled, his voice vibrating through my fingertips. "You're worried about him," I corrected, sliding the knot up until it sat perfectly against his collar. "You're worried he's going to do something stupid and force your hand." He didn't deny it. He caught my wrists before I could pull away. His grip was firm, his thumbs pressing into the soft skin of my inner arms. We were standing so close that the buttons of his vest brushed against my chest. The foyer, the guards, the delivery boxes, everything faded away. "You see too much," he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. "I see the man, not the boss," I whispered back. For a heartbeat, I thought he was going to kiss me. The air between us crackled with electricity, thick and heavy. His head lowered an inch, his eyes darkening with intent. My breath hitched. I wanted him to. God help me, I wanted the monster to kiss me. Then, the walkie-talkie on one of the guards crackled. "Cars are ready, boss." The spell broke. Alessandro released my wrists, stepping back. The mask slammed back into place, but his eyes were still burning. "Stay inside today," he ordered, his voice rougher than usual. "Do not go into the gardens. Be safe," I said. He looked at me one last time, touched the knot of his tie, and turned on his heel. "Let's go." I watched him leave, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I touched my own wrists where his hands had been. I was in trouble. I was falling for the man who was paying my debts, the man whose brother had burned down my life. And the terrifying part was that he was falling too. But reality has a way of crashing the party. 2 hours later, I was in the library, trying to source a specific type of vintage tile for the bakery floor, when my cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Clara Mitchell?" "Speaking. This is Mr. Henderson from First National Bank. I'm calling regarding the personal loan attached to the bakery property, the one co-signed by your father." My stomach dropped. "Yes? I thought everything was being handled. Mr. Versiani's lawyer said the insurance would cover the rebuild." "The insurance covers the structure, Ms. Mitchell," the banker said, his voice clipped and cold. "It does not cover the outstanding personal debt your father took out against the land 3 years ago. There is a clause in the contract. In the event of catastrophic destruction of collateral, the bank has the right to call in the full amount of the loan immediately to mitigate risk." "Call in?" I gripped the phone tighter. "How much?" $150,000. Due by close of business tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I laughed, a shrill, panicked sound. "I don't have that kind of money." "You know I don't. The bakery burned down. I have nothing. If the amount is not paid, the bank will seize the land. The bakery will not be rebuilt. We have a buyer already lined up who is very interested in the lot. A Mr. M. Versiani. The room spun. Matteo. Of course. He couldn't stop Alessandro from rebuilding the structure, so he had gone after the land itself. He had bought the debt or pressured the bank. It was a legal chokehold. "You can't do this," I whispered. "It is already in motion, Ms. Mitchell. Unless you have the funds." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone slipping from my hand onto the plush carpet. I was going to lose it. After everything. After the fire. After the humiliation at the ball. After surviving the first week in this house. Matteo was going to win. He was going to take the land, pave over my father's memory, and build a parking lot or a condo just to spite his brother. I couldn't ask Alessandro. I couldn't. He had already done so much. He was rebuilding the building. Asking him for another $150,000 felt like selling the last scrap of my soul. It crossed the line from partnership to paid mistress. I paced the library. I felt trapped. The walls of the mansion, which had started to feel safe, suddenly felt like the cage I had accused them of being. I needed to fix this. But how? I had no assets. No credit. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze of panic. I tried calling other banks for a loan. Denied. I tried calling the insurance company. They couldn't release funds yet. I was checkmated. When 7 p.m. rolled around, I hadn't started dinner. I was sitting at the kitchen island, my head in my hands, staring at the foreclosure notice the bank had emailed me. The back door opened. Alessandro walked in. He looked worse than he had in the morning. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a bandage on his forearm that was seeping fresh blood. "Clara?" I jumped, shoving the papers under a placemat. "You're back. I'm sorry. I didn't start dinner. I lost track of time." He didn't care about dinner. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbing my chin and tilting my head up. "What happened?" he demanded. "You've been crying." "No, I haven't." "Do not lie to me." His thumb brushed my cheekbone. "Who touched you?" "No one touched me," I said, pushing his hand away. "It's nothing. Just stress. The tiles. They don't make the tiles anymore." It was a stupid lie. He knew it. He reached out and flipped over the placemat I had tried to hide. He pulled out the email printout. I tried to snatch it back. "Don't. It's my problem. I'll handle it." He held it out of reach, reading the document with terrifying speed. His eyes narrowed. His jaw clenched until a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Henderson?" He spat the name like a curse. "First National. Matteo is behind it," I said, my voice defeatingly small. "The banker said a Mr. M. Versiani is the interested buyer for the land. He found a loophole, Alessandro. He's going to take the land tomorrow." Alessandro crumpled the paper in his fist. "He takes nothing. It's $150,000, I said. "I can't ask you for that. You're already doing the construction. It's too much. I can't pay you back with cooking. It would take a lifetime." He looked at me, and the anger in his eyes shifted. It wasn't directed at me anymore. It was a cold, calculating resolve. "You think this is about money?" he asked quietly. "Of course it's about money. It's a bank." "No," he said. "It is about territory. And it is about you." He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. He put it on speaker. "Yes, boss?" a voice answered. "Transfer the funds to First National Bank."